Well, I'll tell you in a moment. What happened was that George Brown College, I was the first chairman, as I aforementioned to you, and I surrendered myself with the committee, as I indicated to you. Charles was never part of it. He was never part of it. What happened was that when I stepped out 10 years later, in 1998, I stepped down from the chairmanship of George Brown, and I was appointed president for life, which I have not bothered with it, but I've been appointed president for life. Charles Greco came on the scene because he was a friend of John Egan, and John Egan brought him on. He did not become the chairman. The first chairman was me, but he became not an employee, a mind reader for the George Brown College and the industry. And that's how he got the job. He engaged Rigson, who was secretary for umpteen years, I don't know how many years. He engaged Rigson, and he held that. But George Brown didn't go forward, went backward. Because the loss of Brian Cooper, and the loss of Doug Light was a huge step back in the industry. Those two people were the geniuses of the era in the culinary world. So I don't know how best I can describe it, but in a short sentence, I would like to say that George Brown was one of my best achievements in progressing toward educating young people. I think the more difficult achievement was catering to 300,000 people in the Pope's visit. Another achievement, catering the museum ball with no kitchen in the museum. Another achievement was catering 4 events for Canada Steamship Line, Mr. Paul Martin up in Collingwood with no kitchen. So, you see, to me, people outside the industry, I'm talking about not enemies, but people that didn't care for Winston's, they would like to consider one of those events to be my death in the industry, or my defunct. It never happened. It never will happen, because I plan long before I say yes. And without planning, you're not going anywhere. You know, when I was approached by Canada Steamship Line, Mr. Paul Martin came in personally in the restaurant to see the kind of food that I would serve. And I said, where's the function? In the Legion Hall in Collingwood. And Pauline McGibbon, the late Pauline McGibbon, was the woman who broke the champagne on the ship as they were launched each time, 4 of them. So we became friends with Pauline McGibbon, very close friends. She was a wonderful lady. She arranged a private interview between the Pope and me. The photo is hanging in the office. And I had several photos taken, and one of the photos I sent to my mother, and she took it in her, buried it with her. So, you know, how do you beat such a moment? Never. Can never happen. Because you got to have human feelings, you got to have integrity, you got to have brutal honesty about yourself. And many people in the industry are not. And It's a shame. I'm ashamed to say it. But you know, at 95 years old, I can ask for your friendship and respect. That's all.
How do you want people to remember you?
Good question. I want people to remember John Arena as a person who did his best in life, who did his best to help some people that were less fortunate, who did his best in New Orleans to cater an event for 1,000 people for the School of Exceptional Children, which are retarded children. And if you go there, I'll make arrangements for you. The school's still going. They play Christmas carols from little bell this big to that big. Christmas carols, all those retarded children. I don't call them retarded. I call them exceptional children. And you know, my mother was born illiterate and she died illiterate. And if she instilled anything in her children, was to be frank and upfront. Never hide the truth, because there is no defense against the truth. And I lived my life that way. Occasionally I would take a side road, but in general, that's been the life story and time and life of John Arena.
For the kids today, taking hospitality, what is your message to them?
Tell you, some years ago, I don't remember who the director was, the dean of the culinary side of George Brown was. It's a woman now, isn't it? What's her name? Do you know?
Lorraine Trump.
Yeah.
It was John Walker.
Yeah, she took me to the restaurant for dinner, which was quite nice. And I said, there's talent here, but it's missing one ingredient. There was service. The food was wonderful, but the service was so poor because they were never taught how to stack the place right. And I said, unless you rectify this second problem, you're not going to be recognized as, you know, Toronto has many wonderful restaurants. Now, the two of you, answer me, why is there not one restaurant with a Michelin star? Not one, in Canada. I happen to have a friend who is on the board of the Michelin, a fellow by the name of George Lindo. He's the owner of the Express Guide, dining guide in Italy. He prints 2 million copies a year and sells them, of course. And he tells me that Canada could qualify, but for some reason they're not coming. Montreal has a great restaurant. Toronto has some good restaurants. But that's a question for someone else to answer at some point in time.
Can I ask you, what do you miss most about your life in hospitality?
What do I miss most?
Yeah.
What I miss most about the hospitality industry is when I see what I see. Incapable, knowledge-wise I'm talking about, people such as the sommelier that I've encountered downtown in this famous club who didn't know, didn't have a clue. That's what I miss most. I miss most the incredible dishes we're ornating our table You know, sure, we love the turkey. We all have a turkey at Thanksgiving time. But what happened to the great dishes that the restaurant menus used to have? The veal orloff, again, I repeat myself, the crown of lamb, the Dover sole almondine, the fresh Dover sole. Winston said 20 Dover soles daily delivered fresh each morning. When they were gone for the day. Where do you go today and been able to talk to a chef one-to-one? I don't know. I don't know. The only man that I've been able to sit down and talk to has been Rocco at La Fenice. He's been the only man. Other than that, you know, Mark McCune is a giant in the industry. I would like to know what he does. I have no idea. Massimo Capra is a giant in the industry. You know, get involved. For God's sake, get involved. Hold a round table conference in your restaurant. Invite 8, 9 students to attend and tell them what the rudiments should be. I know Peter Oliver does. Here's a man that Integrity Plus runs a fantastic, Oliver Bonacini run a fantastic operation and making a very good living. So, you know, I'm not disappointed because, I mean, it's something that it would affect my health if I were to be too disappointed. But I look back with gratitude and displeasure.
What's your favorite dish?
What I cook myself. I tell you, I am a plebeian eater. I enjoy most of all. Home here, I have one of my favorites is pasta and chickpeas with a lovely fresh tomato sauce, basil, which I have growing in there on the balcony. At the restaurant, I go to a restaurant next Friday with my dentist, and there I have the Capelli degli Angeli, very fine pasta with lobster. I love that. In my home, I do my own consomme. I make my own broth. I make my own soups. I cook my own food. And one of the dishes that been, in fact, my granddaughter, Maya, who is a medical student in Denmark, she sent me an email today to say that the best food she has ever had was here with my Italian meatballs. I recently delivered 4 meatballs to the secretary of my family doctor. You know, I love to do things myself, and I like simple dishes. I did for Thanksgiving. I didn't do a turkey. I did a chicken, but I also did a stuffed eggplant. And they was minced beef with Parmesan cheese, freshly grated, Italian parsley, eggs, and Italian breadcrumbs, spiced. And you parboil the eggplant, and then you stuff them, and you put them in the bake oven with a tomato-based sauce, and have a wonderful dish.
Very good. So you know that Orma is carrying on OHI.
Yes.
What is some advice or some vision that you want to share with us to take OHI going forward?
That's a tough question because I don't know how far the industry has gone, but I'll make some predictions. And I've met Tony briefly, as you know. I think he's the right man for the right time. And to have you as his assistant, a woman of integrity, intelligence, knows the right question to ask, I think the industry is on a forward pace rather than backward. I would be greatly honored if you ever have the need to speak to the industry on any matter relating to food and beverage. I'm not referring to, and service, of course. But you know, I live a simple life here alone, and just pass the day the best way I can. Thank you for tremendous friendship that you have offered.
Adore you. Do you have a question, Jeremy?
Did we talk a little bit about the need for OHI?
The who?
So go way back before OHI existed, before
Yes.
you guys started OHI.
Yes.
What was lacking in the world at the time? Was it education? You talked a little bit about that. Why was OHI important when you founded it way back when? And I'll get to talk to Fatima. So why was OHI?
I'll tell you, it doesn't matter where you went, whether it was the King Edward Hotel, the Royal York Hotel. There were some people, not all the people, were well trained, but they were Europeans. They were not Canadians, most of them. And I think the idea was born to establish a college that would teach the rudiments as we know in Europe, as we learned. The industry, I think it's the largest industry in Canada today. And I think that they don't respond to the need of the people. If you go to a restaurant, and let's take an Italian restaurant, and you go to a second Italian restaurant, the menus are very similar. They copy one another. Why? I mean, there's no need. There are so many wonderful dishes that one can create. A chef with a creativity. A chef must be not only creative, but he must be also cost conscious. Because today, most chefs are accountants in the kitchen. They're watching the cost, no more than 32%, no more than 33%. You know, I never watched food cost. I had 45%, I didn't care. I charged for it. And if the people are willing to pay for it, good luck. But watching, I know a place that I will not mention by name because it wouldn't be fair, a place that I worked a few years, that the food cost is 28%. And I dread to think the kind of food they produce. For example, how many people do we know that make their own consommé? In the old days, everybody they had a stock pot, they made their own consommé. As a matter of fact, I want to tell you a little story about a famous chef, a Swiss chef by the name of Fred Staheli. Fred Staheli was my chef, my corporate chef. And unfortunately, he had a bit of a habit, drinking, and he used to keep a bottle of ouzo, Greek drink, in the fridge. At Windsor, I had no idea. And he would go in the fridge with his clogs, Dutch clogs, and have a little drink and back, and perfectly normal. One day, and now this is a true story, sad but true. The Winston's stock pot was huge, I would say 75 to 100 liters. And it had to be lifted by two strong men to put on the stove to make your consommé. And when you take it off, they would put on a round trolley and troll it in front of the walk-in fridge to cool off. One day, Fred went in the fridge. Obviously, he must have had a drink. And coming out, slips and falls into the boiling consommé. We rushed him to hospital. As they were pulling the white pants off his body, the skin was coming off with it. Fred was never the same man again. He was one of the greatest decorators the world has ever known. He went to Seoul to be a chef, and he couldn't. He was he died prematurely. But Fred Staheli is a name that should go in the annals of gastronomy as one of the best garde-manger that the world has created, a Swiss born. His son is in Toronto, I don't know where. I wish he would contact me if he can hear this. I would love to hear from him. But Fred was a very unique individual. His decorations, I mean, he would use a pound of black truffle to decorate a salmon. The truffles would cost $2,000 just to decorate the salmon, but that was Fred. And he had, as a matter of fact, I was invited by Goodwill to do a dinner in Louisiana. And I thought, what a wonderful idea. And in New Orleans, I took Fred down. He was a master of making pâtés. Lobster pâté, beef pâté, lamb pâté, when you call it, vegetable pâté. He was a master. I took Fred with me, and we did this dinner, and he became a hero. And the fact that I was involved with the exceptional school for children, whereby every January they do a dinner for 1,000 people, and I took my chef George Chenier before Fred Stahelli to do a dinner for 1,000 people, compliments of Winston's, and for the children. I tell you, I received a decoration, which I'm going to pick up at Christmas time when I go to New Orleans. It's down there now, from Governor Treen, giving the key to the city of New Orleans. And I don't know if you know, the day before yesterday, a new building hotel collapsed in New Orleans, and a friend of mine, I gave him a call to find out if, because he has a hotel, if it was anywhere near. He said, no, it was a new building, a new structure, and so on. So, but it just goes to show you, I have friends all over the world. My friends in Monterey, California, Ted Balestreri, Bert Coutinho, we correspond. I have friends in Italy, I have friends in Germany, in Sweden. Wherever I go, I leave my card, and I hope that I left a footprint at the last door that I entered.
I'm curious about the name Winston's.
Winston's. This is very good question. Thank you. Oscar Barcella was the original owner of Winston's in Toronto. And my understanding is, although it was never shown to me as a confirmation in writing, is that he knew Mr. Winston Churchill before he became Sir Winston's. And that when he came to Toronto, he was so impressed with the image of this gentleman, Mr. Winston's, before, because he was Sir Winston, 1942, became Sir Winston's, that he said, if ever I open a restaurant, I will call it Winston's. And it opened as a hamburger place. And then turned into a restaurant which was very successful for many, many years, whereby the stars from the Royal Alexander Theatre would come over there after dinner, and I spoke about that before. He was very successful. But, like all restaurants, in my case, every 5 years I would revamp the decorations, because people get tired of a certain, although keeping the same feeling, not going from ridiculous to the obvious. So every 5 years I would redecorate. Once was in burgundy velvet with the lyra birds on it. Another time was green, but, depending what the interior designer, Mr. Carreño, would do. His daughter, Masha, she's my goddaughter, and we're in contact. He died a very young man, 52 years old. So Winston's was opened by Barcella. As I told you earlier, the 17-year closure with the key affected him, that nobody came when he opened the door. And They were looking for someone to buy it. And finally, in 1962, I was managing food and service at Rosedale. And as I said, Preston Gilbride, General Preston Gilbride, offered me the opportunity, and I bought it. But Winston's was named by Oscar Bersala. And it's strange that the day that they knocked the building down to build the Globe and Mail building as it is now, he died. On the very same day. He was very attached to the restaurant. And Cornelia was a wonderful woman, great singer. They had a son. They lived in Rosedale. And they had one son, George, which is in the book. Which, life was what it was.
Can I ask one last question? It might be tough, but can you, if you could narrow down more or less your career, what's the one thing that you've learned about a lifetime in service of others? What's that one thing?
Well, you can't stop at one thing, but I'll tell you the one thing
I'm
that
cheating.
the customer is always right.
Perfect. So start with that. You talk to Fatima.
The
So-
customer
so
is always
start
right.
with the one thing that I've learned in Dr. Fatima.
As I say, the customer is always right because doesn't matter. You can never win an argument with a customer. Let me give you one particular case. Winston's had a heirloom, which was my great-grandfather's cigar clipper. And I brought it into Winston because in the old days, you could smoke in the restaurant. And Frank, cigar maker, a local guy, would bring in the leaves from Cuba, make the cigars for Winston, the number 2 cigar that Winston Churchill smoked, the very same shape, the very same size, and Winston's was the Winston cigar. I had this incredible clipper, and an American gentleman put the clipper in his pocket without the waiter noticing it. So I went to the table, and first of all I said to the waiter, "Where's the clipper? There's a gentleman there wants another cigar." "Oh, the clipper." He went back there, and the fellow refused to give the clipper back. So we had an understanding in Winston that if any trouble occurred in the restaurant, the sous chef, the second in command, Rolf Romberg, who's still alive and doing well up in Aurora, he lives there, would go from the back door with a cleaver and wait at the front door of Winston's. And that was an understanding we had internally, that if there was a problem, the chef would run out with a cleaver. So the man left with the cigar clip in his pocket, and here's the sous chef, Rolf Romberg, who's still alive, with a cleaver, waiting to knock him out. And he returned the cigar clipper very quickly. I can tell you, nothing happened.
Security's handled very different today.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah. But you know, you couldn't get away today with the things that I got away in Winston, inspecting the waiters at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, putting a floodlight on their clothing, making sure that there was not a spot on the uniforms. I mean, you couldn't get away today. And that's why I think that the service has deteriorated rather than improved.
John, is there anything else you want to say?
No,
Like,
no,
we got lots.
I want to thank this lady, the ladies, both of them,
Katrina and Fatima.
for giving me the opportunity to express some of my views. Whilst they may be antiques, they still work in my mind. Yes.
That's great.
You know, antiques have a certain value.
Exactly.
It's called wisdom.
Well, you know, living in a beautiful country, we're so blessed. We're so blessed. And meeting people that have a kind streak in them, you know, you don't hear the insults that come out of the White House at the moment with the terrible language. Yesterday, I mean, he's got a 13-year-old son. He must feel ashamed when he used a very rude word in expressing his view. And so let's hope that next Monday, I will not tell you who I will vote for, but I think you get an idea. I was invited by his father to 24 Sussex Street twice. I went there for dinner.
I'm not impressed.
Thank you.
He's a good guy.
Now let me get the book for you.
Yeah, you were. He's
He
spinning
was
gold
ready
already.
last week.
And the week before. Because you geared me into it.
So John, it's really important that you look at Fatima with your eyes, like with your eye contact all
Yes.
the time.
Oh, yes.
So, if any of the others,
I like
unless
that.
Katrina or myself ask you a question, you answer to
I see,
Fatima,
okay.
just so we keep your eye contact the same.
Okay.
Other than that, if she asks a question about why does OHI exist, if you could start the answer with OHI exists because
Well, I think you want to know the background, how it came about.
Absolutely.
That is most important.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but it's in how you formulate the start of your answer. So
Yes.
the start of your answer has to have
The
kind of her
question
topic.
in it. Yeah.
We'll just try it out and see.
Like if I say, John, what is your favorite snack? Then your answer would be, my favorite snack is.
Oh, I see.
So we know
Yeah.
what you're talking about.
So we
Okay.
know
Because
it,
we won't
'cause
he- we
you
won't
won't
hear
hear
it.
my question
Okay.
in the video.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
First and last name, we're ready anytime you're ready, guys.
John, what's your first and last name? And if you could spell your name for me.
My first name is John. I'm known as John, although I was baptized Giuseppe. And my family name is Arena, Arena.
Okay. And maybe title, past president.
What is your title?
My title is Retired with Pleasure and doing all I can for young people if I'm given the opportunity.
That's not work at any time, guys.
Please tell me your first experience with the hospitality industry.
Well, it happened that I failed grade 3 elementary school in Calabria, and coming home, my mother, after a couple of slaps, gentle slaps to my face, said to me, "You're going to work." My uncle Dominic had a little trattoria in the town where I was born, and so I went there to wash dishes at the age of 9.5. And that's how it all started. And I fell in love with the industry from the day onwards. And if I were to be reborn, I would walk the same path, the same walks, because it'd been nothing but pleasure to me and my family.
What do you love most about the hospitality?
Serving.
Can-
I was
can
born
have a
to
question?
serve.
Just
And
a-
I
And-
want to say the thing I love most about.
Oh, what I love most is when I find a perfect menu in a restaurant, which is very rare in nowadays. Quite often you read the word wild mushrooms. Well, wild mushrooms are not allowed to be sold in a restaurant. So they are grown mushrooms. And when I say a menu that does not comply with the great menus of the past that Escoffier, Carême, Francatelli delivered in their years, I am a little upset and concerned.
Yeah, just keep talking to Fatima.
So
Don't look at me.
why are you upset and concerned?
Because I think the industry has gone backward and not forward. With the exception of very, very few people in Toronto that I know of, and the one in Vancouver, which is Chopino Pino Posteraro, I don't know that many restaurants really have the ingredients, the right ingredients to run a restaurant, to own a restaurant. And quite honestly, it's upsetting because you walk into a restaurant hoping to have a great celebration, because dining is, the Greeks were the first people in the world to start a round table dining. They were called archomangeros. And those people created an everlasting story, because today we're still enjoying a round table dinner with the family on special occasions, such as this past weekend, the Thanksgiving weekend. So you see, the industry has not gone forward in the manner that I recognized when I was 18 or 19 years old.
And what are some of those things that you saw?
Well, The change came about due to lack of education in the industry. The change came about to people forgetting about the 3-hour martini lunch. They're in a hurry now. The change came about waiters and waitresses. If I see a waiter carrying a dish and it's not properly stacked to go out to the kitchen with other dishes, I know he's not a trained waiter. And today, very rarely you see someone who's fully trained for that, because there's a way that you can tell by putting the knives and forks in a certain way on the plate when you carry them out. So you see, the industry, in my opinion, and again, I say this is a personal matter, lost that lust. For example, Peter Newman, the famous Canadian writer, wrote that the Winston's waiters are waiters in exile. Now, you never hear that anymore. They were professionals. I'm talking about the early 60s, the best of the best. We were wearing tails to wear. Today they wear running shoes, the waiters and waitresses in most restaurants. Some restaurants still care about it. There are very few tablecloth restaurants left. Why? Question mark. You must ask why. Why is the Liquor Control Board of Ontario is the only agency that a restaurant or a hotel can buy drinks? Why? Can buy spirits? Why? There's so many questions, and in my lifetime I don't think I will ever be able to resolve them, because the industry is, in my opinion, in a fast downfall position.
But John, there has to be light at the end of the tunnel. How do we get back to the way things were? How do we try to get back to that service? Is it through education? What are your thoughts on how we get back to the glory days?
Good question.
And if you look at Fatima and
Good question. If we were to implement for example, the Italian system of training, I think that would help. I have no idea at the moment what the George Brown College, the time limit is for a student to become a waiter or a young cook. But in Italy, you don't touch a dish in the restaurant as a waiter until you have served 3 months of busboy. And that busboy learns from the master, who is his boss, is a waiter. And using the European system, the captain, the waiter, and the busboy, which is each station has 3 people serving. The captain takes the order and supervises the service. The waiter brings the food in and out of the kitchen. The busboy cleans up. Until you regulate the system of service, you will never have what I call the romantic area of dining.
How did a boy from Calabria get to know so much about service?
Let me tell you that in 1948, I joined the Merchant Marines. And I was in London. We were parked in London with the ship. And I went in a bookstore. And therein I found a book called The Epicurean, signed by Charles Delmonico, who is a New York-born chef with a hotel in New York City, Delmonico Hotel. I found the book and I bought it. And I began to study the greatness of Escoffier, Carême, Francatelli, Savarin, the greatest chefs, the menus, the decorations. When you use maybe a half kilo of black or white truffles to decorate a salmon. Unheard of, no more. I have some photographs of when I was living in Australia, working at the greatest restaurant in Australia, that Neville Shute, the famous writer of the book On the Beach, declared Mario's restaurant, where I was the head waiter, as the last building standing in the world after the destruction of the world. So it's a fiction book, of course. But there in Australia, I left Italy for Australia because my father had not written for 2 years. And my mother in 1939 said, as the oldest member of the family, go and find your father in Australia. I was 14 and 7 months, 14 years old and 7 months. And we walked to the station, which was about 4 kilometers away, took a train, third class, to Naples. My mother, my uncle Dominic, and me. And I boarded a ship called the Oronsay, an Orient line owned by Britain. And there, aboard the ship, 36 days later, I landed in Australia. And 5 months later, of course, the war started. My father was interned. I was left alone. And I had to be the master of my own destiny. And in search of my depth, I found Mario, who, again, I want to repeat it, Jake LaMotta says, somebody there likes me, because I don't remember time in my life, since almost the day that I can remember, that I haven't had someone, a mentor, to come to my aid at a moment of need. I can tell you that my mother, she was my best mentor. The priest, Giuseppe Blasi, was one of the most wonderful individuals to give me directions in life. I was an altar boy. In Calabria, everybody was poor, with a capital P, in the town where I was born, with the exception of one person, Barone Lombardi Satriani, that my grandfather, who was the administrator for the Baron, got a job with them, and he was able to bring a little food home. Many nights we went home hungry. The most popular dish in those days was polenta, which is water and corn flour. So, you know, the fact that I grew in a part of the world that was so poor. In 1922, Mussolini came to power, and he said that he would change everything. He would improve this situation down South Italy. It never happened. So we relied on people doing the barter system. Uncle Dominic was a shoe repairman. He would fix your shoes, you give him a bottle of oil. Someone else would give you a chicken, you give them a dozen eggs, depending on how the barter was operating. But we lived on that for many years. And since religion was a very strong part of us as young people, we abided by the priest. Whatever he said was God sent. So, you know, having experienced the kind of gravity in life and having the passion to survive, it made me where I am today. And it's in this regard that in New Orleans, there's a school for exceptional children. And in 1985, I went down there with a $6,000 check and a catering job for 1,000 people to help this school, which was operated by Sister Liliana. She's dead now, in New Orleans. I have a photograph of that with all the children around me. And again, I must, at the cost of repeating myself, I wanted to help people that were unable to help themselves. And that, you know, my family motto is aim high. And it's precisely that motto that I adhere to. There is an expression in Latin, fortuna juvat audacius, meaning fortune follows the brave. And I consider myself amongst those people that try to do better for those less fortunate. Unfortunately, I'm not in business anymore, but during my years in business, we helped a lot. We helped a lot of people. And we did things that no one else would do. For example, Winston said 15 tables permanently reserved by corporations and people. No one else did it. I started a club called Le Club de la Casserole, which it was not my idea, original idea. It came from Paris, from Le Serre restaurant in Paris. And we started a club, Le Club de la Casserole, and I had 400 members. When I moved from 120 to 104 Adelaide Street, 120 King Street to 104 Adelaide Street, I was concerned that I might not get the business. Therefore, I went and asked the favorite guest if they would purchase a 1% interest in Winston's. And I ended up having 22 shareholders, which gave me, for $50,000, they bought 1% of Winston's. Winston's was showing a great profit in the early years of my operation from bankruptcy situation. Therefore, I realized $1.2 million a year because they were committed to spend $50,000 a year in the restaurant, those members. So $1.2 million was my break-even point. I couldn't go wrong. And that's what drove me, the creativity, bringing new dishes. Where do you go today to see this, the crown of lamb, beautifully presented with the minted piece in the center? Where do you go to see the veal Orloff? Where do you go to see the Dover sole almondine? I mean, I don't know. How many restaurants in Toronto do you know? And I went to a couple of really expensive restaurants hoping to see the menu. There was some caviar on the menu. I said, couldn't find it. The beluga, the Sevruga caviar. I mean, Winston's was receiving a 2-kilo can every Monday from Petrosia, New York. Every Monday morning, they would deliver a 2-kilo can, and we served the caviar, Sevruga. Caviar at $35 an ounce in those days. And every Monday morning, if there was anything left, they would take it back to New York, Petrosian, and give me a new can. So you see, because Winston's had the silver wagons that my dear friend Peter Oliver bought when Winston's was sold by the people who bought it from me, I admired him for his vision because the caviar was always served on silver wagon. And where do you go today and you have fish and they give you fish knife and fork? Nowhere. They give you a knife and fork regular. One spring of wine. I was at a great restaurant not long ago. I was the guest of a gentleman downtown. It's a steakhouse, very famous, well known. And I asked the sommelier, a young lady, attractive enough to present herself, if she had any idea if they had a bottle from the domain of Romani Conti, which is the #1 domain in France with only 8 hectares, 16 acres of land that produces 5 wines, Romani Conti, Richebourg, La Tâche, Grand Chasseau, and Le Chasseau. Those 5 wines are the top Burgundies in the world by any standard. She didn't know what I was talking about. She's a sommelier, graduate from George Brown. I mean, what are we teaching? Let's be serious. When I ask that same sommelier, are you familiar with the German classifications? She had no idea what I was talking about. Well, you have the Cabinet, the Auslese, the Spasslese, Trockenbeerenauslese, and Beerenauslese. Those are 5 classifications. Why are we not teaching the rudiments of the industries, wine and food? You can ask, and I'm not challenging anyone, but you can ask anyone in any restaurant in Toronto, give me the 5 classifications in Burgundy of Romani Conti. Simple.
Cell phones, guys. Gotta have that turned off.
My fault.
It's okay. I didn't say anything beforehand. I'm checking mine right now.
Mine's off.
Yep, I'm off as well. We are good.
Brought tears to my eyes.
Well, that's what it is.
I love your story.
I'm very lonely.
You have a lot of people around you. Us included.
Well, Fatima, There are beautiful people in the world. But I think that we're afraid of being who we are. Quite often because of the uncertainty.
Is it okay if I ask a question, John?
I beg your pardon?
Is it okay if I ask a question? And
Oh,
you
yeah,
you
well,
answer
well.
to Fatima?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about when you first came to Canada. What was your first job when you came
Yes.
here in hospitality? And
Well,
tell us the whole story right here.
This is a very interesting story. I came from New York because I
Don't look
worked.
at Fatima, don't look at me.
I worked my way from New York to Toronto. Pardon me, correction, please. I worked my way from Italy to New York on a boat. And then in New York, took the train, third class, and came to Toronto. Toronto was the only country that I could go because I had the landing papers at the time. Coming out of the station, I saw this huge building, the Royal York Hotel. And I thought, my word, what a big hotel this is, because I was accustomed to little hotels in Italy, 14, 20, 30, 40 rooms, you know. And I went in the Royal York. Downstairs, they had barbers, and across the hall from the barbers were washrooms. So I washed myself, changed my shirt, got my credentials out. The Royal York in those days, I'm talking about 1957, in those days had box that you could leave your luggage in there for a quarter, for a number of hours. So I left my cardboard suitcase in one of those boxes and dressed myself with my best shirt, my best suit, and went out to look for work. The first job I went was the Royal York Hotel. And the personal director said, you got great credentials, but I cannot engage you because we are getting ready for the Christmas festivities to soon arrive, and we are fully staffed. Thank you very much. I walked out. The next one I went was the Westbury Hotel. And they're the same story, and I'm sorry we have no jobs opening. Then I went to the Lord Simcoe Hotel, which is no longer there. And then they said they could give me a job in about 2 weeks, but not at the moment. Well, I only had $65 in my pocket, therefore I couldn't wait 2 weeks. I said, no, I got to have a job yesterday. I went to the King Edward Hotel, which was my last call. And there I went upstairs to Tony Hyman, who was the personal director. I gave him my credentials, and he said to me, he said, you have great credentials, but we don't need anybody at the moment. Try us again in a week or two. Well, I was walking down the stairs from the second floor to the main floor, rather dejected. I thought, how come that I can't get a job? I have the best credentials. I worked in the best hotels, the best restaurant in the world. Can't get a job. And beside me, there's a gentleman walking down. But in front of the oak room, which was right directly in front of the stairs coming down from the office, was Nick Crane, the maitre d', and Bill Kaplan, the assistant maitre d', arguing and yelling and screaming. And people in the lobby were coming in, and they could hear all this noise. And I happened to say to the gentleman who was walking down, I had no idea who he was, if I were here, I would fire one of them. The gentleman said to me, who are you? Well, I said, I'm John Arena, looking for work, but there is no work here. He said to me, wait here. I waited for 10 minutes, he came back. And he said, my name is Gordon Carty, general manager of the hotel, before he went to the Royal York. He was the general manager of the King Edward Hotel because his uncle, Vernon Carty, used to own it before he sold to Sheraton. So he said to me, he said, I'm the general manager right here. Came back 10 minutes later, said, I saw your credentials. He said, the personal director, Mr. Tony, showed them to me. Go to the 9th floor. There's a Mrs. Helen Barrow. Get yourself fitted for a uniform. You're starting tonight as a captain in the oak room. That was, again, somebody that likes me. Because believe me, I had no room to go to stay, no place to stay. I had no idea what would happen in the next 24 hours. I started in the Oak Room. Bill Kaplan is nowhere to be seen with us. I sit in Madrid. And Bill Crane, who was a beautiful, wonderful, wonderful man of Polish origin, said to me, he said, welcome. And I thought that was a cold welcome, but nonetheless I accepted. Then I tried, at 5 o'clock he would have the captains sitting around the table with him, having a coffee and discussing the evening. I tried to pull his chair, he's my boss. He said, man, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm helping you to sit down. Cut that out. Trying to pour his coffee. And I thought, my word, where the devil did I land? Anyhow, he was the most beautiful man. He said to me, you know what? He said, you're new here, you don't know our system. But whatever money I make tonight, I'll give you half. I thought, this guy's crazy, absolutely crazy. Well, he was the most popular man in the room by the people. The Hedge brothers, which owned the President Champagne sparkling wine in Niagara Falls on the lake, were there every night. Leo Romanelli was the band leader, and he had a 12-piece orchestra. And the Hedge brothers, they had the drums under the stage that they would bring out when Leo Romanelli started the boom, 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 boom. People were complaining, and he said, send them a bottle of champagne, President champagne, which they owned. Every table had champagne on the table, so they stopped complaining. But it was a romantic era. People were beautiful. I remember very vividly Fred Gardner from the Gardner Express, Mickey Wilson, the Harbor Commission, Paul Penna, Frankie Nassau. They were residents in the hotel, and they would come they would go to Club 21 on Richmond Street at the time, which was owned by Mr. Holmes. And Mr. Holmes' wife and the group of 5 or 6 people would go there first, then call me around 11 o'clock. Mickey Wilson would call, and he'd say, the Harbor Commission, he would say, set aside the 30 whiskeys, we're coming down. And I would set aside, because 1 o'clock was closing time, I would set aside 30 whiskeys, and they would come down and have a lot of fun. Many times, I carried them to the suite upstairs on my back, because they were too tired to walk. Let's use that expression. So for me, it was serving people. That was the most beautiful part of my entering Canada. I loved Canada from the moment I landed here. But in addition to that, I had a more important reason to love Canada. Because in the office, working for the catering director, Mr. Mickey Micheli, was a beautiful young lady who was his secretary. And I saw her. Beautiful. I was hoping not to. Can you cut it off for a moment, please?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I saw her and I thought, what a beautiful, beautiful person. She was tying the lace on her boss's shoe because he had a bad back. And I said, I must meet her. So for months, 3 months at least, I tried to ask her to come for a glass of wine or a coffee. Nothing doing. So finally, I had to engage the catering director, Mr. Mickey Micheli, to set a date for her with an unknown. She didn't tell her it was me. And so she accepted the date. She was living on Union Street. She had a room there because she had just landed here a few months before me. And when she saw me, she said, I didn't expect to see you, because I tried everything to ask her to join me for a coffee. In fact, one day I was trying to limp into the office, showing feeling sorry for me, but nothing worked. Finally, we got together, and in May of that year, of the following year, 1958, we were married at the City Hall, because I had to wait for the papers from Italy to be married with the church, which happened in August of that year. Well, Nick Crane was her best man. We became such a close friend, and at the end, when he was quite ill, I was one of the pallbearers. And there were precious moments for me in a new life, new country, and I just loved the place, I loved the country, I loved everything about it. So the Oak Room and the Victoria Room, the waiters were playing games. And because I was trained in Italy to watch for the unreal, and that was in the back of my mind, what can I see today that shouldn't happen? And what was happening was that the waiters were coming in, punching in around 2:30, 3 o'clock, then leave, because next door there was a billiard room with 8 tables, and leave the room, having punched in, getting paid to play shoot billiard next door. So I made a memorandum to myself, and I kept it. Then it happened that I was introducing new systems of operation, which were far more formal, with the staff doing what they were told. At times they didn't, of course. And I gave a report to Boston, which was the head office of the Sheraton hotels. And the report called that we have a meeting with the general manager or with the catering manager, one of the two, to clear the air, because there were so many things happening that were not in keeping with the good management. Well, the catering manager was, he was not the man to be on site whenever that happened, was Nick Crane, and I loved Nick Crane, and I didn't want to put him into difficulties. So I said that I noticed things that were very difficult to notice, and they called a meeting. Now remember that I was a captain in the Oak Room, and I had to be a member of the union. Onofrio Zambri was the business agent, and he, a wonderful chap. And it was mid-April 1958, when the waiters, they said they would go on strike unless there was an instant meeting with the general manager, the catering director, the chef, myself, and the staff in the Oak and Victoria Room. I was a captain. I had to have a card to work, member card, the union card. The disagreements were born by not doing what they were supposed to. And according to them, I didn't understand the rules. I worked in Australia where everything is upside down, and all kinds of words came out of the staff. Nonetheless, the catering manager was there, the union was there, all the waiters, 13 of them, which I photographed there to show you, all against Arena. So Zambri said, Arena, you can no longer work here. Give me your card back. This is April, 5 months after I landed. Mickey Micheli said, Onofrio, you ask everybody in here what they think of John Arena, but you never ask me, I'm the boss. Oh, Mickey, I'm sorry, Mickey, I'm sorry. Yes, what do you think of John Arena? I think he's the best man we've had. And any remarks from those waiters are totally untrue. He's rigid, but solid and honest. The question was, Zambri said, in any case, you can't work anymore, give me your card. Mr. Micheli, bless his heart, he's in heaven, I'm sure, said, give your card to him. I was not supposed to work. He said, effective immediately, I'm announcing John Arena becoming the maitre d' of the Oak Room and the Victoria Room, where he does not need to be in the union. As God be my judge. It happened. Because the waiters run in all directions. But I didn't let them go. I tried to teach them the rudiments of respect for the industry. Not me, I'm just one person. But the industry is large. And that's when I sort of dedicated myself to do something for the industry. I didn't have the means, financial means, but I had the ideas that by creating a college of the statue of George Brown on 300 Adelaide Street, we could have a wonderful school. And it was in 1982 that I began to search my own depth how to do it. Now, Dr. Betty Stevenson was the Minister of Education for Ontario under Bill Davis. And she was a regular at the Windsor at least once a week. I asked her if she would meet me in her office at any given day to get her secretary to call me. And she said, of course. And they called me and I set up a meeting with her. Also, Claude Bennett was the Minister of Tourism at the time. So I went to their office and I said, look, I think that Ontario is in need of a university-level educational center. And she said to me, well, why don't we give you 90 days to come back with a report? And again, I must say that the most horrible position or portion was that only 12% of the people were trained in the industry. And they were Europeans. In Canada, the colleges, which are 22 colleges at the time across Ontario, did not teach the rudiments of the profession in reality. They might talk about it, but that's all. So I went to Dr. Betty Stevenson and I said, would she contribute $5 million if I were able to get John Roberts, Minister of Tourism in Ottawa, to contribute $5 million? She said she would if the federal would contribute that amount. Doug Light was the president of George Brown College. He died, a wonderful man, died some years later. And they said, the industry must realize $5 million as well. So it was 555. I embarked on that in 1982. And we raised $5 million from the province. We raised $5 million from the federal government. And in my committee that raised the $5 million was Doug Light, major fundraiser, John Egan Restaurant, Art Ward, Wigga Morgan, Halliburton, George Kibadi, government official, and Fred, forgot the second name. He was a government liaison, federal government liaison. He was the manager of Menaki Lodge. So we embarked on this fundraising, we raised the money, and then we chose the architects. And let me tell you that what happened, the government of Ontario said, where should the college be? I said, it's got to be downtown to give students the chance to travel without having to take in cabs and cars and traveling out of town. So the Duncan House was the house that was sitting on the property where George Brown is sitting today. And that the very house was moved in full structure with building in and out frames of steel to remove it to University and Queen, where it sits today. The Duncan House was the location where George Brown College was to be built. We worked with the architects, where Brian Cooper was a genius, and the Doug Light was two geniuses in one. And Winston's helped a lot because I was able to raise a fair amount of money in Winston's. In fact, I only raised money on 2 occasions in Winston's because I was becoming a bore for many of the clients. And the second occasion was when Gordon Bosworth, chairman of the board of Canada Dry, called me and he said, John Arena, I need $125,000. I said, for what? To buy 5 ambulances. I went to Doug Creighton, he rest in peace in heaven. He gave me 25,000. In 1 hour, I had 125,000 with Winston's participating in 25,000. I called him back, said, they got the money. He said, you're nuts. I said, no, I'm not. They got the money. Those are the names. But let's go back to the, where was I?
Why did you raise, you were talking about raising money at Winston's, you used your own
Yeah.
business. So talk about that. Talk
Yes.
about why you did that.
Well, the reason why I was Winston so well attended, so well attended by the majority of wealthy clients, and the fact that we had 15 tables permanently booked. For example, Doug Creighton, Toronto Sun, number 1. Number 2, Goodman and Goodman. Number 6, Larry Hogan, real estate mogul. Number 15, J.J. Barnagy. Number 16, Ernie Jackson, John Robards. Number 22, John Turn. I had all the tables occupied by people of strength, people that dominated the operation of a country, in a sense. John Robards, Bill Davis, they were all there. So it was no problem raising the money because people knew that we were on the right track. And that's how George Brown was born. When we got the money, we had 2 architects giving us design. Finally, the college chose their architect, and the Duncan House by now was moved. They had to remove all the cables of the streetcar. To move the house was higher than the wires. And they had to remove all that on a Sunday morning. The house was there. So George Brown was born. Under the direction of the Dean of Culinary Service, Brian Cooper, I tell you, it went extremely well. Now, I know that Mr. Higgins is doing a great job. I know that. I know it because he's the kind of a man that doesn't leave a stone unturned. But I would like to see what I experienced in Australia. At 5 o'clock, all the staff of Marriott's restaurant were called and asked them, do you know the recipe of chicken a la dishes that were on the menu? What's the recipe? And we had to know it, otherwise we get the day off and come back tomorrow with knowing the recipe. I would love to see the waiters being asked, do you know what goes into a Ville Orloff? Do you know what goes into a Tornado Rossini? Do you know what goes into filet mignon with stuffed with oysters? I mean, this doesn't happen. And you know what? It's part of an education. Bring the wines, the sommelier program back to be what it should be, and you will create an aura of elegance and knowledge. Unfortunately, I don't know what is happening because I'm now I have distanced myself from the industry for some years. But if I were to go back in the industry in my next life, I would follow exactly the same path as I followed in the last 70 years. More, 80 years.
John, there's going to be a lot of people in the room that know the name John Arena,
Yeah.
or they're going to know the name Winston's. Help the people in the room and the industry know your journey as a summary from when you were at King Edward to get to Winston's.
Well, back to the King Edward Hotel, what was happened that since the waiters had protested my appearance, I told you about the union, I was the maitre d' there. But in 1962, by this time I was married with 2 children. And in 1962, a fellow by the name Preston Gilbride, General Preston Gilbride, came to me in the Victoria room where I was at the door, Montreal. And he said to me, he said, look, there is a vacancy at the Rosedale Golf and Country Club as a food and beverage director. Are you interested? He saw in me what many others did, and some didn't. And I said, well, I would like to know a little more, because I have a family now. You know, I have to be very careful. I'm very happy in my work. And he said, yes, come up and meet with the board. I went up to Rosedale. Alan Parker was the general manager, an English gentleman. And the board met me, which was under the auspices of General Gilbride. He was the chairman. And Murray Bosley, for Bosley Real Estate, was the vice chairman. And they asked me all kinds of questions, what would I do for the club? The club was in need of fresh blood. For example, they didn't have a youth program, and I established a youth program. We had Friday night dancing. We started that. We changed the menu. We brought in a good Swiss chef with a French chef to assist him. I mean, we changed a lot of things. The restaurant became the most popular place in Toronto. So General Gilbride, again, said to me, John Arena, I'm the principal shareholder of a restaurant. And I don't know what to do. The restaurant is not doing well. He said, are you interested? And because in the back of my mind, I always imagined being in business someday for myself. Because of that, I said I would consider it, but I have a family, you know, which comes first. He said to me, it's Winston's. Oscar Barcella, the owner, wants to get out. The restaurant is not doing well. It has $45,000 liability. And I will sell you, since I'm the principal shareholder and all the other shareholders have agreed to sell, I will sell it to you for $2. $1 for the shares, 100%, and $1 for the debenture. The debenture was $350,000, that if you made the money, you take it.
This is a great spot. Can I get you, because the ambulance is, the siren is
Okay.
really loud. So tell me about the deal you had. And you talked to the team of the deal you guys had to buy Winston's. Just talk about the dollars.
What's that? What I didn't
He
understand.
was waiting for the ambulance.
Oh, yeah.
to
I'm
leave.
just trying to
Yeah.
buy time.
So let's
now,
go
so.
back to, he was gonna sell it to you. Tell us how.
Right.
the-
For $2, he said $1 for the shares, $1 the debenture. That if you made the money, you would take the debenture tax-free. And $45,000 liability. He didn't mention that. So I accepted the deal, and he said, you go to Mr. Russell Payton of Payton, Biggs and Graham, legal offices, and discuss the acquisition of Winston's. Mr. Payton is fully familiar with the change. I went there, and Mr. Payton told me there was $45,000 liability. But I loved the idea of being in business. And I said, I'll risk it. So I went to the bank and asked if I could borrow. And they said, you don't do any business, CIBC said, no, you don't do any business with us, we don't know you. And Preston Gilbride said, I will sign a note for him. So the CIBC became my bank, and to this day still is my bank, because Preston Gilbride signed a note for $45,000, which I paid in full many times. So I'm now the owner of Winston's. Winston's had, and in the book Winston's, well, I'll present you today with it, had famous people, Charles Lawton, Frederick March, Lucille Ball, Donna Andrews, all the most famous people in Hollywood were coming to the Royal Alexandra Theatre, and he would invite them for dinner after the theatre as his guest. So he had a resident artist by the name Harold Shaw. And Harold Shaw would sketch them, put them in a frame and hang them on the wall, which you will see it in the book. So his wife, Katrina, she was an opera singer. So she would sing at night in the restaurant. But the mistake that he made in 1942, he made a horrible mistake because, mistake as far as I am is concerned, but not as far as he was concerned. Across the road, there were two hotels, the Prince George and the Metropole, and the Monopole, three hotels, that would have girls renting rooms by the hour, come over to Winston's, select the individual, go back. That, it was the owner of the Globe and Mail that said to Oscar Barcella, that must stop, introduce the Key Club. And in 1942, the Key Club was introduced in Winston's, and 5,000 keys were stamped and giving out. And the club became very famous for 17 years. You could only get in if you had a key. But at the end of the 17 years, the club was becoming dilapidated, or the people didn't go anymore. Somehow they had to open the door, but opening the door was not easy because you didn't want us for so many years, the business community, now not coming. So it was then that it was decided to sell Winston's for $2 plus the liability. And I bought it, and there was a union. 5 people, 5 employees, 3 waiters, 1 busboy, and 1 cook. Was no business, $130,000 sales the year before I took over. And when I sold, it was 5 million sales. So, I mean, it was a dead horse. So I said, we must decertify with the union. And we went to court. Judge George Ferguson, a judge with what do you call this under your arm when you have a bad leg to walk?
Oh, with a walker?
Yeah, not a walker, no, that. Yeah, yes, yes. And we saw him, and he decertified Winston's. He said there was only one way to attend the court. His name was Hans Stegner, and I brainwashed him long before to say no, 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 in case he would say yes, because he was a nice guy. And the judge asked him, "Do you want to be in the union?" He said no. So no, decertified. So I closed the restaurant down, engaged a fellow by the name of Louis Carregni, a stage designer, not a restaurant designer. Went to Paris, went to Maxim's. With permission of the owner, we photographed Maxim's, returned to Canada, went to Aida Furniture, a fellow, a Yugoslavian owner, Vlado, and gave him photographs and did a replica of Maxim's in Winston's, which the reproductions of painting by Gustav Klimt, which the 1930 was the Belle Epoque era. Gustav Klimt on the walls, the wood was an instant success. But from $130,000 sales the first year to $2 million, when he sold it was $5 million. So Winston's became the place to be in Toronto. Across the road, in 1957, they were building the Dominion Tower and the other 2 towers. And once the towers were up, because remember, all the soil came from there, went to Ontario Place to create Ontario Place, 22 hectares of land at Ontario Place. So when the towers were up, I went and knocked on every door, corporate door, and left my business card. I did it personally. In many cases, I met their secretaries and talked to them. Look, I'm the owner of Winston's. Come and see us. If you can stop for a second,
Sure.
I want to get.
Where Winston's was located.
The
Where was Winston's?
the first Winston's was at 120 King Street West. The second Winston's was 104 Adelaide West also. We just moved 1 block. When the Globe and Mail, they owned the building. And so they gave me 5 years and no more. So at the end of 4 years, I began to look for property to move. I had a great business going, and I found that the 104 Adelaide Street West was owned by a lady who lived in London, England. I flew to London to ask this lady if she would sell the building. She said no. And I said, why not? Because it was sold a month ago to the people next door to Winston's, Imperial Optical. Well, I said, then I must ask them if they will listen to me. I came back, I met with them, and they leased the building with 12,000 square feet in total. They leased it to me at $1 per square foot for 25 years. And I tell you, I was in heaven. Because now, since the building during the war was used to do maps, print maps, there was a lot of acidity on the floors, which the inspectors came in, and it shows a great deal of acidity, poisonous. So we had to refinish the floors down below. And they put in an elevator, because I want to rent the 4th and 5th floor. And I took 1st, 2nd, and 3rd floor for myself, for the restaurant operation. And so we put in an elevator, and I rented it to a gentleman who ran his company from there for many, many, until I left anyhow, till I sold. So now Winston's, I engaged a fellow by the name of Joe Agner, Artistic Glass, which is still in business on Dundas Street, to do a wall that I had seen in France. And the wall was of gastronomy, fruit, vegetables, heads of chefs, chefs like Antoine Carême, Francatelli, the famous people. And he did that, and I was very happy, but people were disappointed to see this glass, huge amount of glass on the wall. And in fact, J.J. Barnick said to me, John Arena, I said, it's not Winston's. It doesn't fit into the Art Nouveau. So at the cost of $30,000, I took it out and gave back to him. I mean, he refunded me some money. Joe was very nice. So anyhow, Winston's became the place to be. And as I said to you earlier, we had 15 tables, thereof 23 permanently booked. If they didn't come for lunch and they didn't cancel, which was very rare, I would charge $100. But I also had the right 1 hour after the booking reservation was due to sell the table or give the table away. So at the end of September, I would have, because I had a separate account with all the money that came from no shows. Lunch was 100, dinner was 200. So I had about $30,000 at the end of September. I went to France, bought the best cognacs in the world, and gave it back to them in kind as a Christmas gift. But it was their own money. But it's not the money so much. It's the creativity that the boy, the shoeless boy from Calabria, that didn't have shoes until he was 6 years old, became somebody. And again, I must refer to somebody up there likes me, because there's been so many pluses in my life. I mean, in Australia, you see that the round painting there? That the painting is signed Teresa Vigano. She was the wife of Mario Vigano, Mario's restaurant. And when I left, many tears were shared between all of us. And she invited me for a final lunch at their farm in South Morang, Australia. And that was the decoration on the table that day that I had luncheon with them, the final lunch with them. She painted it and gave it to me as a souvenir. Teresa Vigano. It was 1957. So, you know, I could fill this apartment with memories, of beautiful memories. I can honestly say that I never met a nasty individual in my life or a nasty person. Maybe I don't see it, maybe I'm too retarded to see that, but I don't. I love people, and in return, I'm being compensated graciously and wonderful.
You're such an inspiration.
Well, you know, Fatima, it takes people to know people. And what's the next question, if there is one?
There is
Lots of questions.
lots. So help us with the connection between Winston's to OHI. How did that come about?
Now, this is a wonderful question. Thank you very much, Fatima. This is perhaps if I were to count my blessing, this were to be number one, and let me tell you why. The Ontario Hostelry Institute. It was Claude Bennett, who was a regular at Winston, regular once a week, and he sat at John Roberts' table, because there was the government table. Said to me, he said, John Arena said, what, you know, we are looking to expand in the industry with a college. There are 22 colleges in Ontario that teach the rudiments, but none of them are complete culinary colleges. And I said to him, I said, look, I said, in Stresa, there's a college in Stresa, Italy, Lago Maggiore, where it gives you all the answers. He said to me, he said, get the information. I got the information from Stresa, that Stresa was built in 1911, the culinary school in Stresa. So I got all the information, and he said to me, he said, is there anything like in Canada? And I said, yes, something similar, but not the same, in Montreal. The Culinary Institute of Montreal. He said to me, he said, can you make arrangements for us to visit? I said, I think it'll be a lot easier for you as a government official to call them, since his government ran, to make an appointment. So he did. And he said, we're going to Montreal one morning. He called us about a week before. He said, we're going to Montreal next week to visit the Culinary Institute in Montreal. The Director General was Antoine Samueli, an Egyptian-born, was a beautiful man. His knowledge was immense. And Antoine, in 5 hours showing that morning, he the minister understood that they must have something similar in Ontario. On that plane was John Arena, the minister, John Egan, Art Ward, Ken, I keep on forgetting his name, I don't know why, Ken Wilcox, and another government official, Fred Zimmerman. He was the manager of Menaki Lodge. We went there, they showed us, we returned. That night in Queen's Park we had a meeting, and the meeting appointed me as a chairman to organize my committee, which I made every member, with the exception of the government official, member of my committee, that went to Montreal. So John Egan, Art Ward, they were all members. They were all, in fact, John Egan and Art Ward, the two vice chairmen, because I was very busy with the Winstons. There were times when I could not attend a meeting, so one of them would chair it. So that's how the idea of George Brown came about. It was a return from Montreal, Chairman J. Arena, John Egan, Art Ward, Ken, and the government of Ontario. Oh yeah, there was another proviso that Betty Stevenson, when I come back, I think I've mentioned that, but she said to me, if you can raise $5 million from the federal government, I will match it with the $5 million. The wife of John Roberts, who was the Minister of Tourism in Ottawa, was working for me at the time. It was a lucky break. Again, you know, I've got to look up there. there's somebody up there. She's working for me as a photographer to photograph special events, weddings and so on. And she spoke to her husband. He came to Winston's, and we shook hands, and he gave me $5 million, which was now $10 million. And Doug Light, John Egan, Art Ward, myself, and the industry raised an additional $5 million, and George Brown was built. Now, what's important is that in 1990, we opened George Brown in 1988, November the 11th. It was the Liberal government in power at that time that Gregory Sorbara cut the ribbon. But in 1990, in Italy, together with 5 other partners, I was the 6th partner to build a culinary school for foreigners in Italy, in Piemonte, Costiglione d'Asti, Piemonte. The school's still there today. And for 25 years that we undertook to own the school and manage it, we did it. Let me tell you a very important point in this. In 1991, the first group of students to go to ICIF, ICIF, Italian Culinary Institute for Foreigners, were 24 students that the Winston sponsored from George Brown College. I'll tell you, it wasn't a cheap trip. 24 people, 3 months in Italy with education and so on. So you see, I've contributed to the industry as much as I could, but the industry gave me a lot. First of all, gave me a wonderful family. Secondly, I bought one of the greatest homes in Toronto in 1968. I was living in Don Mills on Chipping Road. Very happy, but I want something big, and Winston's was providing a lot of revenue, and I want something more classy, let's say. On a Saturday afternoon, I went for a drive, and I see a man putting a sign up on a sale of a home. The grass was this high. And I said, take the sign off, I'm buying it. He said to me, you're crazy. No, I said, I'm not, I'm buying it. What's the price? $135,000 they're asking for it. I said, offer them 85. I could sell my property in Don Mills for 42. The rest I would mortgage. Offer them 85. They'll throw me out. Offer 85. Accepted the order. They accept the order. 458 Blythewood Road was the home of Charles Dolphin, the architect who built the Royal York and Canada building. 10,000 square feet, 1 acre of land, with a natural spring pond in the back of the property with over 2,000 goldfishes. I bought the property was in a mess. And Morel Construction, my friend Marco Muzzo, who's passed away many years ago, he remodeled the home for me to make it livable. And all my children and my wife lived there for 32 years. When we sold the home, prices had gone up considerably. And I was very happy to move to Port Credit. Yeah, waterfront property. And then from there, I came here because every weekend the place is so busy with the cars, weddings and so on the lake, so it was enough for me then.